Strange. Here's the outer bathtub wall that faces the Hudson. And this is the base of Tower 1, or the remains of it, where that's the bedrock. So you see this is the original wall. There's the underground from underneath Building 6. This is the WFC buildings. Now we get to the seismic impact. If those buildings had slammed to the ground, the seismic chart would have reflected 2 500,000-ton buildings slamming to the ground, and a 230,000-ton building, Building 7. One of the first responders said, "I don't remember the sound of a building hitting the ground. Someone told me that it was measured on the Richter scale. I don't know how true that is. If the building's hitting the ground that hard, I don't remember the sound of it." I'd like to add to that, someone who worked on the 27th floor contacted me after my book came out. And he said when everything was happening that day, he knew he wasn't going to get anything done. So he packed up his stuff and headed to the ferry terminal because he lived on Staten Island. He walked past Tower 2. He was on the 27th floor of Tower 1. When he walked past Building 2, he looked like he was in good health. Fire was about out, but things would be hectic for the rest of the day. He got down to the ferry terminal, and there's a big building blocking the view, so you couldn't see the towers from there. And somebody came up saying that Tower 2 had just collapsed. They all thought he was an idiot because they just walked past Tower 2 and it was fine. It looked like the fires were about out. He didn't hear it. He didn't feel the ground shake. So this guy must be an idiot, right? The ferry left, went out in the middle of the Hudson. Then he could see past that building, and there was only one tower standing. He said he was just totally blown away. It was incredible. Wonder if this is why. This part of the building doesn't make a thud when it hits. Earlier that year, January 2001, there was an earthquake in Midtown Manhattan of approximately the same magnitude as what was recorded for the demise of Building 1. Do you see something different between the nature of these two? They're on the same time scale. You usually get, with earthquakes, you get the primary wave and then the secondary wave. And the timing, they move at different speeds through the earth, so they arrive at different times. And this, the lag time between them tells you how far away the epicenter is. You don't see that here. Not only that, look at the spacing. The frequency is much lower than here. Turns out this is only a surface wave. No S wave or P wave. Now what are S waves and P waves? The P wave is like snapping a rubber band, a direct pulse through the earth. And the S wave is like a jump rope motion. The motion is transverse to the direction of travel. And the surface wave, think of if you get up off your mattress in the morning, it springs back. Well, think of, for example, King Kong reaching over, grabbing these towers and chucking them up into space. You're taking that weight off of the bedrock. That surface has got to recover. And that was the only wave measured. Again, this is the earthquake. Now let's look at the seismic signal during the demise of Tower 1. It lasted about 8 seconds. But it takes about 9.5 seconds, 9.22 seconds in a vacuum to drop a bowling ball off the roof and have it hit the pavement below. Houston, we have a problem. How can you have the ground shaking for only 8 seconds when it takes 9.5 seconds to drop a bowling ball free fall off the roof? The tower did not slam to the ground. It turned into dust in midair. No S wave or P waves. S waves and P waves travel through the earth. Surface waves travel just on the surface. There was no signal that went through the earth. That's consistent with not having a building slam to the ground. Here's a seismic chart for most of the day. Tower 2 is already gone, and then Tower 1 goes, 2.3 in the Richter scale. Down here at about 5:20 p.m., just after that, see that little blob? The Fox Islands, which are part of the Aleutian Islands out in Alaska, they had a little earthquake. That's on there. But see this red vertical line? That was the demise of Building 7. There was no seismic event to speak of. Well, let's look a little closer. First, this is the Seattle King Dome, because maybe you think it was controlled demolition that took down Building 7, and that maybe there's something different with controlled demolitions. Well, notice the spacing, the high frequency, and it has that little snout that leads up to the big signal, S wave and P waves. And how long does it take to drop a bowling ball off the roof of the King Dome? Just under 4 seconds, and the ground shook for much longer than that. So if it takes 9.5 seconds to drop a bowling ball off the tower, it should be, the ground should shake for at least 20 seconds, wouldn't you think? This is 5 different recording stations, recording during the demise of Building 7. They couldn't pick it out of background noise, the S wave and P wave, so they calculated when it should have arrived. And there's nothing that you can detect. It takes 6.5 seconds to drop a bowling ball off of Building 7. And you can see the little disturbance here, which is the surface wave, is less than that amount of time. And this site, which is in the very most southern tip of Connecticut, that recording station, they couldn't pick anything out of background noise. Basically, the demise of Building 7 was a non-seismic event. Let's compare that to the King Dome, which made a 2.3 when they blew it up in the spring of 2000. Controlled demolition. Compared to that, if the first building to go away on 9/11 was Tower 1, which made a 2.1. It's 30 times the potential energy. But if we turned all but the bottom 16 stories to dust, and then just collapsed a 16-story building, we would get approximately a 2.1 disturbance. And for Tower 1, all but the bottom 20 stories. And you know something? Remember how we didn't see any stab wounds in that dome? There aren't any, what I call stab wounds, a big piece of steel stabbing into the building across the way. There's nothing really above the 18th story across the street from Tower 1. And for Building 7, all but the bottom 2.5 stories, if you turned it to dust and just dropped that, you'd get that. Rather amazing. Where did the buildings go? Another unique word I like to use is dustification. We've never seen a building turn to dust before in midair, so we don't have a word to describe it. We need a new word. We can't use a word for a known phenomenon to apply to an unknown phenomenon. I think dustification is pretty self-explanatory. You need to put that in the dictionary. We saw this one earlier. That material is turning to dust as it falls. This image, often folks like to think that that's a squib from some kind of explosion. Well, there should be a whole lot more of them, and why doesn't it squirt out very far? You think of all the things in that building that should be squirting out for its demise. One thing that comes to mind is water tanks. 110-story building, you don't pump the water from the ground to the roof. Imagine the siphon power. You pump it up in approximately 10-story intervals. Another holding tank, pump it up from there. So you're going to have these water tanks staggered all throughout the building at some regular interval. And what happens when this pressure vessel begins to weaken? It's starting to dustify. At some point, it's suddenly going to give way, and the contents are going to squirt out. I think that's what that could look like. I don't know what this is, but that makes a lot more sense to me than a bomb. And I don't think you'd use the corner office to store water tanks. But let's think about all the stuff that needs to squirt out of the way, because we saw it didn't end up on the ground in a pile. If a floor is dustifying and that stuff has to get out of the way, and if the whole thing goes away in 8 seconds, which is faster than free fall, the purple values apply to that. But if you go ahead and give it, you know, the speed of regular gravity, it's the white data. So at this point, the average speed of the stuff squirting out would need to be in excess of Mach 1. By the time it gets to the ground, the average speed stuff needs to be squirting out is in excess of Mach 1.4. And the stuff from the center is squirting out at Mach 2.5. So all the adjacent buildings should look like they've been machine gun fired. Didn't happen. But if the building is turning to dust in place, it wouldn't need to squirt out. A lot of folks say that there are sounds of explosions. Well, bombs do go boom, but not everything that goes boom is a bomb. Think of an egg in your microwave oven. And we're used to seeing these signs. I don't know if you have the same kind of signs here. Turn off cell phones and two-way radios. Blasting zone ahead. Rock quarries, you don't want to have, you know, an accidental detonation. So how are you going to wire up a big building and not have anyone using their cell phones in Manhattan? I think there's only one place that would have more density of cell phones, probably Tokyo. Turns out these Scott tanks, these are the air tanks that the firefighters wear so they can breathe fresh air when they're in a smoky environment. They have extra tanks on their fire trucks. Those extra tanks were said to have been exploding at ground level. That's weird. And there's a lot of testimonies of those. We don't need to read them, but there's one in particular by Rene Davila that is interesting. His boss asked him, you know, was your vehicle destroyed? And he said, yeah, vehicle 219 was destroyed. Was it on fire? What? Was it on fire? Fire, we saw the sucker blow up. We heard a boom. His vehicle blew up. Now this particular image, I don't know how many people have seen this. Will probably shock you. This is the demise of Tower 1. We'll see it full speed right after this. But notice in this northwest corner we're watching, there's going to be a beam you see emerge from here, trailing dust. And I want you to watch it and watch what happens to it. Here it is. I think that's it there. Yeah, here's the beam right there, trailing dust. Just keep your eye on that beam and the dust that it's trailing. It runs out of material to turn into dust. There's other parts doing the same thing. And here's the Verizon building. We're going to later go down and look at ground level to see what landed. And all of these are trailing dust. All right, here it is at full speed. You see this? Now think of, you know, all the different explanations for that. Did it start shooting dust ahead of its path to obscure it? And then realize why there was not a very big seismic signal. And that's the intersection where that stuff should have landed. There's the Verizon building. Read the body language. Hands at the side, arms folded, hands on the hip. They've just come out of their hiding places. And I think something's missing up here, like a building. Tower 1 had stood, this is building 6. Tower 1 had stood right next to building 6. It's just unburned paper there and some aluminum cladding, and that's about it. Building 7, folks often think of as regular controlled demolition because they see it start to come down. What they don't see is the next stage. Here it starts to drop here, but look at all this, I call it lather, the thick froth that comes out. This is 1 second, these two frames are 1 second apart, approximately. And you can see this dust cloud hasn't advanced much more, but the stuff squirting out the windows is just tremendous, as though it had frothed up in the dust internally and just started pouring out the windows when the building appeared to be dropping. Building 7 stood for about 7 hours with this fumes coming out of it all afternoon before its final demise. And one more thing we're going to look at from different directions. This picture is looking at the toasted car park from there. And notice all the unburned paper. Why did just the vehicles appear to catch fire? I need to be careful. I don't want to call that fire. Appear to catch fire. We don't want to assume anything. Now watch this remaining part of Tower 1. This is 47 stories tall. I think that's about 700 feet tall up to there. These are the core columns remaining. I think actually that's the top of stairwell B where those guys survived. It just faints into dust. We'll see it one more time.
There are no words. You can see large pieces of the building falling. You can see the smoke rising. You can see a portion of the side of the building now just being covered on the right side as I look at it.
So while you're sitting on the seat, why don't you check the evidence? I'll tell you something that you'll learn. World Trade Center paper doesn't burn. And how could those buildings fall with a seismic impact so small? I know that something's wrong. 8 seconds the North Tower's gone. I'd tell you if I could, but you need to ask Judy Wood before you accuse someone. You better make sure you know how it was done.
Richplanet TV is coming to a town near you. In May 2013 I will be travelling around the UK speaking at the following places: Gateshead, Glasgow, Leeds, Liverpool, Birmingham, Weston-super, Southampton, Reading and London. I'll be covering recent UFO reports which is not to be missed and exposing a range of issues you won't find discussed on mainstream TV. Get ticket details from the richplanet.net website.